All right, so now we have our Redux store set up and our provider. Now we're going to start to work on our actions, reducers, stuff like that, connecting them to components. So let's jump back in here. And this is the root reducer here, the index.js that's in the reducers folder. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here, and I'm going to call this log reducer.js. And the reducer is going to work the same, pretty much the same way as it did with the context when we used the use reducer hook. So we're going to export a default function here, and let's see, this function is going to take in state, and it's going to take in action, and then we're going to evaluate with a switch, the action type. Okay, and then we're going to have a default where it'll just return the state as is. Now, we're not going to have a state file like we did with context. What we do here is in our reducer we create our initial state. So let's say const initial state, which is an object. So we're going to have a few things here. We're going to have logs, which I'm going to set to null by default. But what's going to happen is when we make our request to JSON server and we get our logs back, we'll fill it with the array of logs. We're also going to have current, which I'm going to set to null, and loading, which I'll set to false. If you want to do what we did in the last project where you set it to true by default, you could do that, but I'm going to just do the, set it to false, and then right before we make the request, set it to true, and then set it back to false when we get our response. And then let's put error null as well. Okay, so that's our initial state for logs. And what we'll do is right here where we have our state, let's set the default as initial state. All right, so we'll go ahead and save that, and let's bring it into our root reducer. So we want to import log reducer, and that's going to be from /log reducer. And then all we have to do is go into this object right here that's in combine reducers, and let's just call this a log. So basically this right here is what we're calling our state for the log part of our application. So I'm going to call it log and then set this to our log reducer. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now if we go back into, we should get that message cleared from the console, that error we had before. You can see that's gone. And if we go to our Redux DevTools and we go to state, you can now see we have log. That's the log part of our state, which has all the defaults right now. So what I'd like to do now is fetch our logs from JSON server, which we're doing right now. However, right now we're doing it from within the logs component. That's not how we want to do this. We want to do it through an action. So in order to have actions that dispatch to the reducer, we need some types. So let's create a folder inside source, and let's call this actions. And I like to put my types file in here. So we're going to create a file called types.js. Now, instead of typing these all out or typing them as we go, I'm just going to paste these in and you guys can just copy them. And it gives you an idea of the different actions and the different functionality that this app is going to have. So get logs, add, delete, set current, update, clear, set loading, logs error, search logs, get text, add tech, delete tech, and text error. So let's save our types and close that up. And we can close up our root reducer, and inside actions we're going to create a file, and we're going to call this log actions.js. So in here is where we're going to have any actions, and the first one we want to have is to actually fetch the logs to get them. So I'm going to import, let's say import from our types, and going to bring in here get logs. Oops. Get logs. Let's bring in set loading, and let's bring in logs error. That's really all we need for now. And then we're going to go down here and we're going to create our action. So we want to export this. So export const get logs. It's not going to take anything in. All right, now from here we could directly return an object to our reducer with the type of whatever, let's say get logs. But if we're going to make an asynchronous call to our backend, which we are going to here, then that's where Redux Thunk comes in. It allows us to basically, instead of just returning an object, we can return a function, and that function gets passed in a dispatch method that we can use to then dispatch to our reducer at any point, meaning we can make the request to our backend and then wait, get the response, and then dispatch to the reducer. And I know that this is a little difficult to understand. Now, before I go ahead and do that, we are going to have an action here to set loading, and that's not going to need Redux Thunk. It's not going to need, we don't need to make any asynchronous calls. All we're doing is setting in the reducer the value of loading to true. All right, so let's say export const set loading. And the reason I'm doing this now is because we're actually going to call this function from within get logs, because we need to set loading to true before we actually, get the data back. So let's say set loading, and then all we need to do here is simply return. So we're returning to the reducer a type of set loading and save, and that's it. That's all that we need for this particular function. So this will set loading to true. Now to catch this in the reducer, it's going to come in as the action type is going to be set loading, so we need to bring that in. In fact, I'll just copy these three from the types. We need to bring those into the reducer as well. Now this is going to be in a different location because right now we're in reducers, so we want to go up one level into actions and then types. And then down here, let's add the case for set underscore loading. And for that, we're going to return, it's the same exact way that we did with context. We're going to return the state, and then we just want to fill loading with true. Okay, so it's that simple. Now, to get logs, like I said, we have to make an asynchronous call. So we, instead of returning a direct object like this, we have to return a function. And I'm going to do it one way that I think will help you understand it, and then I'm going to basically refactor it to shorten it up a little bit. So in here, we can now return, Redux Thunk allows us to return a function directly. So we can go like that. And this takes in, or can take in, dispatch, which allows us to dispatch to the reducer at any time, dispatch a type and a payload. And then we also have something called get state available to us if we want to get any part of the state. But this is optional, and I don't believe we'll be using this at all. So we don't actually need get state. Now in here, let's go ahead and set loading. Okay, so all we're doing here is calling this function which just sends to the reducer set loading and sets it to true in the state. Then we want to make our request. Now, since this is asynchronous, we're going to go ahead and say async, and then we'll make our fetch request. So we'll say const res equals await fetch, and we're making a request to /logs, and then we get our data with await res.json, and then we can dispatch our object to the reducer. So type is going to be get logs, and the payload is going to be the data. Now, I'm going to refactor this a little bit. For one thing, we should be using try catch, because if we get something back that we shouldn't, then we want to handle that accordingly, and that's where logs error comes in. Also, instead of having to in here say return async dispatch, we can cut this down shorter as well. So what I'll do is copy this and comment it out just so you guys have it, and then let's paste this in again, and I'm just going to show you how we can refactor. So instead of doing this, we can go to this first line here, and after this first arrow we can then do async dispatch and then an arrow, and then we can actually cut this entire thing out, this and its ending curly brace. Okay, so that's one, and then we should add a try catch here, say error, and then what we'll do is we'll put all of this inside the try. Okay, so if everything goes okay, and then inside the error, let's go ahead and dispatch the type of error. What are we doing? Error logs. Sorry, logs error. Is that what it was? Yeah, logs error. And then let's send as a payload the error dot response dot data. Okay, so I mean this is doing the same thing this is, except we're doing some error handling. But I think that writing the dispatch this way is better than embedding the function like this and returning it. Okay, so I mean it's up to you which way you want to use, but this way is definitely, I think, easier and cleaner. So let's handle the get logs and the log error in our reducer, and then after that, in the next video, I'll show you how we can actually call this from our component. So let's go to our reducer, and let's see, we already brought in get logs and logs error. So logs error is going to be pretty simple. We just need to put the error into state, so let's handle that. We'll say case logs error. I don't know why it keeps doing that. So case logs error. Now I want to console log if there is an error, just so we know. Actually, we'll do console.error, and we'll just output the payload, which should be the error message. And then let's just do a return state, and we'll fill the error with the action.payload. Okay, so that's logs error. Now let's do the get logs. So I'll do that right here. Case get underscore logs, and we want to return. So this is pretty simple as well. I mean, we're just returning, we're spreading the current state, and then we're going to fill logs with whatever we get from the server, with the data which we sent in the payload. And then we're just going to set loading to false, because it'll get set to true by set loading, and then once it's fetched, of course, we want to set it back to false. So let's save that, and I think we're good as far as the actions, the get logs action, and the reducer. So now in the next video, we're going to go ahead and call this from our logs component rather than doing it right, doing the request right in the component. And I'll show you how to do that.